It's great. The game's great. Honestly, I wish I could tell you it's bad. I wish I could tell you you didn't have to spend $450 for a piece of shit and then another $70 for the game, but it really might be worth it this time.
Lord Frogmire's video on Donkey Kong Bananza can safely be called slop. It's designed to send a simple message, work within the algorithm, and offer unobtrusive praise for an expensive product on an expensive console. Most of what he says largely affirms his own biases rather than challenging viewers to think about anything beneath the surface. Mostly. And given I consider myself a deeper thinker, this kind of stuff generally doesn't appeal to me. But that doesn't mean there isn't something compelling at the fringes, something that evokes further response. And to be fair to Frogmire, the entire conversation around this game doesn't ever seem to rise above the elephant in the room that is how much video games cost right now. So we should grant that's hardly an objective merit when judging the worth of the game itself. So maybe in an alternate universe where inflation wasn't skyrocketing and consoles cost $200 and video games cost anywhere from $40 to $50, this conversation would be different. But anyway, that's mostly the perspective I'm coming at this from. No, I don't think I ought to buy a Nintendo Switch 2, much less Donkey Kong Bananza. So most of what I'm going to talk about here is from the standpoint of what if I theoretically bought it? You know, like the breakfast question. What I'm saying is, what if we weren't looking at the price point and instead we were judging the game by its own merits? And so from that perspective, Frogmire's phrasing and descriptions are vivid enough to paint a picture of the gameplay, and that is useful to me. You know, this reminds me of old YouTube, where videos were far more informative and incorporated an edge unique to the entertainer. And you have to admit, Frogmire's videos are well edited, or at least as well edited as splicing together a bunch of clips one after the other to emphasize various talking points would be.
Just think back to the last game you played. How much time did you actually spend playing the game? Back in the day, all you had to do was turn on the game, and within 30 seconds you were playing. Now it's you wait for matchmaking, which could be 5 to 10 minutes, maybe 30 seconds in games that literally don't give a fuck. Then you're waiting for players to load in, waiting for yourself to load in. Then you have to wait for the match to start.
The pacing is precise, and I would even say you can feel the passion of someone who has wanted to say exactly what he says for a long time. This is especially true for Frogmire's video on multiplayer games. You know, you could practically hear his blood boiling through the screen.
These are team-based games. Your team can determine whether you win or lose, and no matter how good you are, there's nothing you can do about it. Unless you are literally a fucking god, even professional players will lose because their teammates are just so dog shit.
So even if you don't agree with what he says, the craft and energy are undeniable, and it was enough to spark my own reflections on video game design, especially regarding the topic of progression and reward systems that make some games truly remarkable and memorable. It's also important to note that slop is exactly what YouTube thrives on right now. By that measure, Frogmire's videos are appropriately successful. They appeal to the lowest common denominator, hitting all the algorithmic sweet spots. You can't shit on a man who's basically doing what he needs to do to succeed in a pretty shitty digital environment right now. You know, one that desperately needs to change, so that more worthwhile voices, some of whom may be shadow banned, can receive their due. Understanding this context also helps me frame my own critique here. We can appreciate the craft and insight of someone else's video, while also recognizing that the format is largely dictated by the platform, not necessarily by any design philosophy by the creator. So, to understand why Frogmire's points are worth talking about here, it helps to look at my own experience with platformers. I want to start with the Wario Land series. Unlike many Mario games where enemies often act as obstacles to avoid, Wario lets you smash your way through the world. There's a visceral satisfaction in flattening your foes and creating tons of on-screen chaos. Every shoulder tackle and ground pound delivers a weighty feedback loop. Ever since I was a child and to this day, I can attest, there was just something extraordinarily gratifying about obliterating your environment and your enemies. And like I said, many Mario games, or even many of the Donkey Kong Country series, your success often came from avoiding mistakes, finding secrets, or mastering jumps. And the thrill, of course, was in perfecting the timing of hazard avoidance. Wario, on the other hand, you did have hazard avoidance, but the mechanics also encouraged being aggressive. And I like being aggressive. You can throw enemies, you could run into them with your shoulder, or you could throw them into other enemies or use them to break walls. So yes, Wario Land games came with a pretty standard arcade-style loop, plus just smashing up tiny creatures or large bosses for immediate gratification, all giving you a sense of power that the Mario games rarely did. You weren't just avoiding pitfalls or hopping on Goombas, you were interacting with the world in a far more brutal, albeit satisfying way. And of course, because the Wario Land games layer collectibles and alternate routes on top of this, your ongoing destruction fed into long-term goals, even if they were not numerically tied to RPG progression, like we see in Donkey Kong Bananza. As Matthew Matosis would describe it, you're not just pushing buttons for the sake of pressing buttons. Your inputs are tied to desire and motivation. Every jump, every shoulder tackle, or every grab exists because you want something, whether it's your own survival, whether it's getting some treasure, or simply the thrill of beating up some hapless enemies. And then there's Wario World, and I enjoyed it, don't get me wrong. It's colorful, it's fun, it's full of Wario's signature grunts, laughs, and catchphrases, but it's too short. Not just in game length, but in depth. And throughout the game, you're just obliterating enemies for sure, but after a while, that just starts to feel empty. To this day, it surprises me that Wario World constitutes a genuine Wario game, because it feels cheap and underdeveloped. Not buggy or unfinished, mind you. It is polished, but you solve the gameplay loop in less than 15 minutes in, and the only variations beyond that are the boss fights. The game gives you the sense that there should have been so much more, especially considering Wario's status in the Mario franchise. You're bulldozing through enemies, collecting treasures, but your path is far too linear. It's on the rails. It never quite reaches the depth or variety of previous Wario games, leaving it feeling like a game that holds back, like an incomplete statement about the character's potential. So yes, while it's fun for a while, you can't help but wish for a more meaningful progression loop, like what Frogmire praises in Donkey Kong Bananza. Like how each collectible builds toward tangible upgrades or new abilities.
So how do they make the collectibles desirable? Well, the RPG elements, of course. Yeah, I know, it sounds fucking insane. Genuinely, it sounds like corporate meddling, like every other stupid AAA game that shoves in RPG elements for no reason, but it fits so well. The main collectible, golden bananas, give you skill points. Every 5 golden bananas, you get 1 skill point. Then you can use these skill points to get skills. And the important part is these skills are impactful. Each skill, upon unlocking them, immediately improve the gameplay. And it makes every banana feel like you're working towards something important. It's like, oh man, I just need 1 more banana and now I have a double jump. Or, oh man, I just got 3 skill points. Now I can surf across water. Or now I can be in my super giant ultra monkey form longer. It's just such a stark difference between Odyssey, where every time I got one of the stupid fucking moons, you had to sit through Mario dancing like a dipshit over what would essentially amount to as a 1-up in literally any other game. But in Bananza, every time you get a banana, it doesn't matter that it's 1 out of 1,000 bananas. What matters is you're now 1 step closer to that cool skill you really want.
Now this brings me to talk about Donkey Kong Country 2. For me, it remains one of the best 2D platformers ever made. Why? Because it demonstrates that progression doesn't have to be numerical. Donkey Kong Country 2 gives you a basic set of controls, but then level layout, hazards, enemy placement, timing, and various secrets. Each level in Donkey Kong Country 2 is unique, often stacking degrees of difficulty and forcing you to adapt and strategize with moves that you've become familiar with. The player feels the progression not because of stats or skill points, but because the game keeps on presenting new situations to you. So the success feels earned. You learn, you apply, and you master. And that's intrinsic motivation at its finest. The reward comes from the satisfaction of overcoming challenges using the tools you already have. And while I do think Donkey Kong Country 2 is fantastic, it isn't without the same minor flaws we see in Super Mario Odyssey. Specifically, the collectathon nature sometimes becomes arbitrary. You're gathering items simply for the sake of gathering them. Certain collectibles like banana coins feel out of place or overly abundant, and their practical value doesn't always match the effort required to get them. And you are rewarded, yes, but sometimes this is more for your persistence than for clever engagement with the level design. That being said, we have seen this template improved. A game I recommend as a spiritual successor to Donkey Kong Country 2 is Kaze and the Wild Masks, a modern indie platformer heavily inspired by the 16-bit era. And there you play as Kaze, a rabbit who harnesses magical animal masks that give her different powers. The game leans hard into colorful pixel art, tight controls, and precision platforming, all aiming to capture that 90s feel of challenging but rewarding side-scrollers. And so it takes the core principles of early platformers, like the varied level design, clever hazards, and refines them all. But what's more, all the collectibles in Kaze are meaningful. The levels also challenge your mastery of all the controls that you've learned. And each stage does introduce new twists without relying on arbitrary accumulation. It's a great example of how the Donkey Kong Country 2 blueprint can evolve while maintaining everything that made the original compelling. The only caveat is that the game was made in Brazil.
Oh my God!
Anyway, let's bring this back to Donkey Kong Bananza. Frogmire describes how golden bananas feed your skill points, fossils upgrade costumes, and gold fuels the super monkey fantasy.
Well, what about the other collectibles? Well, costumes are back, of course. And sure, it's good enough reward to look a little cooler, but no, they went one step beyond, and the costumes give you a tangible benefit. They all have substantial stat increases. I'll admit it, originally, I wasn't getting all the fossils. I'll get them if I see them, maybe I'd look for a couple, but as soon as I noticed that, I'm like, man, I want more big monkey time. I love being a big monkey. So I'm getting every single one of these, and I was having more fun. The game was more fun when I was trying to get every single one, and I just need that little push. That little bit of extra reward makes all of the difference.
So here, progression isn't just cosmetic or superficial. It's all built into the system. Every collectible has meaning, and you're not smashing enemies aimlessly here. You're advancing. You're shaping your character as you would an RPG, and you're actively working toward a goal. This is good. This is the desire motivation loop in action. Every input is tied to a reason. Every reward satisfies a specific desire. And you contrast this with Wario World, where inputs do feel satisfying in isolation, but lack long-term stakes. Bananza understands that progression amplifies the fun. The player keeps going not just because the mechanics feel good, but because the mechanics feed into tangible growth. Going back to Matthew Matosis, he offers a useful lens here. He distinguishes between the input-output loop, pressing buttons and seeing the results, and the desire-motivation loop, pressing buttons because you want something. Unfortunately, many platformers focus only on the input-output loop. That's why they're fun for a short session, but not compelling over longer hours or even days. But extrinsic rewards, achievements, collectibles, upgrades, they're tools that reinforce motivation. But they only work if the player brings intrinsic desire into the loop. In Bananza, the golden bananas, the fossils, and the gold all provide extrinsic rewards. The thrill comes from intrinsic desire. I want to unlock this skill. I want to extend my super monkey form, or I just want to feel powerful. It's all synergy that makes progression feel meaningful. And we've seen similar principles in other games. Castlevania Symphony of the Night blends platforming with RPG progression. You level up, you acquire new abilities, you explore non-linear environments. It all keeps the action meaningful. But ultimately, the contrast is clear when looking at platformers that ignore this principle. Games that rely solely on surface-level feedback, jumping, punching, grabbing coins, they often fade from memory. And that's because without progression, without meaningful reward, the novelty alone will carry the experience only so far, but that novelty will wear off fast. So in closing, progression and reward systems aren't optional layers. They are what separate a good platformer from a truly memorable one. And so based on what Lord Frogmire has said, Donkey Kong Bananza shows how RPG-style mechanics can amplify engagement. And then in contrast, you have Wario World, which demonstrates what happens when games miss the chance to give actions lasting significance. Ultimately, whether it's through RPG mechanics, level design, or clever integration of collectibles, the principle is the same. Give players a reason to care about these things. Make actions meaningful. That's what would keep us coming back. It's what makes platformers memorable, and it's what prevents a simple jump, punch, or coin collection from ever feeling like an empty action.